So recently I made a video about trad wife TikTok, and we went down a bit of a rabbit hole about just like various trad wife influencers and what is driving it. Now, on that video specifically, we focused on trad wife influencers around the Mormon church and people raised in the Mormon church who are taught to be a trad wife.
After being gone for a week, my husband's on a 6-hour flight back home. And what better way to surprise him than with some fresh vanilla ice cream and some gooey chocolate brownies. And then my husband walked through the door, so I decided to serve him up some of that brownie and ice cream. This is one of his favorite sweet treats, so I'm excited that he really liked it.
And I've been sitting in my car crying ever since because I never have enough money. And why do I never have enough money? Because when I was a 19-year-old girl, I fell in love. My Mormon faith told me that I was supposed to be a stay-at-home mom. I got married. I started having babies. I dropped out of college. I never had a career. My only jobs that I ever had in life were a waitress at the Olive Garden and managing a pretzel maker in a mall. So I found myself divorced at age 44 just 5 years ago, and within just a few months I was living in my car. While he made about $250,000, he would eventually quit that job so that he wouldn't have to pay alimony and child support. He has only paid alimony one time. Not a day that goes by that I don't wonder why. Why I didn't have a backup plan. Why my kids eating and having stability was dependent on a romantic relationship.
It's not relegated to the Mormon church, and it's a trend that is going across TikTok from various different religions, mainly centered around Christianity. I have seen some for Islam as well. And if you're unaware what this is, it's basically wanting women to fulfill this very fetishized, like 1950s suburban white mother fantasy. Basically fulfilling this like Mad Men type lifestyle where the wife is basically maid, servant, and mother, and the man, the husband, has both no responsibility to the family, really, because that's all the wife's job, but also they control everything. So we can all see why that's bad, and in the video I made a couple weeks ago, we had testimony from people who were raised to be trad wives and became trad wives, how it became such a disaster when their husband actually divorced them and left them with nothing, and because they'd been married young, they actually had like no employment history, no history of basically anything, not even bank accounts, right? That is like the huge risk of this lifestyle. Now, also another trend we've been seeing recently is a lot of right-wing conservative influencers who are women have been coming out and saying, conservative men are just so misogynistic, can they just stop please?
Getting real tired of the anti-female rhetoric being espoused by some people, groups in the right wing. Everything you dislike about feminists and the way many portray men is exactly what you're becoming yourselves, but with respect to women, cease. I'm with you on this. Other verified ticks, girl, tell me about it. My other observation is they are unironically proving that feminists are right with their spewing and probably creating more feminists in the process. They are a net negative for the right wing and for society in general with their ideas.
Which to many of us is just so ironic because, yeah, of course conservative men are misogynistic. A lot of men, regardless, are misogynistic, but they believe in an ideology that fundamentally sees you as inferior. So yeah, of course they're misogynistic, but lots more of them recently have been getting into like these trad views and have been saying to women, yeah, you shouldn't have jobs and you shouldn't even be able to vote. Now, I've covered that in various other videos, as I've said, but recently Lauren Southern, who actually was in this like trad wife relationship with her ex-husband, has come out and given a massive interview about what the reality of that was like. And a lot of people are being a bit sympathetic to this. And personally, as a leftist, I believe most people can be reformed, especially if they're indoctrinated from a young age. Even someone as extreme as Lauren Southern, considering all the terrible things she did, even I believe she could be reformed. But don't take this interview, which is very sympathetic to her, as me being sympathetic to her. Because I'm not sympathetic to her, because although she's had this terrible experience straight up of the conservative worldview through her relationship and having children with this man, on Twitter, if you go on it, she is posting the exact same shit she has always posted, including stuff that is a throwback to her like poster child days in the alt-right, right? So don't take this video as a video where I'm saying everyone should go follow Lauren Southern, she's had such a terrible time, because, yeah, she has the same politics, with a lot of these conservative women, they want to be hateful bigots to every single other group of people, but they want the conservative men they hang around with and help promote this stuff to actually treat them equally as well. So no problem with demonizing migrants, Muslims, demonizing trans people at all. That's all fair game. But when the conservative men turn on me, then that's when I have to speak out. And this video is just going to talk about Lauren Southern's experience and just to talk about the reality of being a trad wife even more. And hopefully other people who read her story or maybe watch this video, they realize the whole conservative worldview is bad. It is bad for a variety of reasons, but at the very least, for women, it doesn't see you as equal. So why would you prop up an ideology that keeps you oppressed? Maybe those radical feminists were actually onto something, and as various conservatives have said in the past, and I've covered this, these men are actually proving the liberal feminists right. So all of that coming up for you today. Please follow me on social media, on Threads and on Blue Sky. Also on my personal and my travel Instagram. And if you want to support my work, consider becoming a patron and you also get access to the Discord server. So Lauren Southern is someone who left the alt-right for a variety of reasons. Here it says she stopped doing media duties because she became a trad wife. Remember back in the day, she also made that video talking about how she's like more centrist and stuff, despite saying the exact same stuff. To me, it always seemed like a massive grift because she got banned, I think, from the UK for what she did to refugees with various militant fascist groups. And like I said, I believe people can be reformed, even people like this. But when you show basically no desire to actually be reformed or actually change your views, then I don't think you were being sincere at all. And if you go on her Twitter right now, please explain to me how that is any different from a far-right conservative, apart from maybe she pays a bit of lip service against a lot of the misogyny on the conservative side. But to me, that's just because it affects her. It's not because she has any principles. But anyway, for Unheard, the author here did basically a profile on her, which is very sympathetic. And it's because Mary herself talks about in this profile how she was raised in like a left-wing commune. So she's a kindred spirit in some ways with Lauren Southern in that they were, one was far right, one was far left. And as we all know, that's basically the same thing. And they've come to this more like centrist place through their experience. Now, in this interview, Lauren Southern details her extremely toxic and abusive relationship with her husband, where she served this role as trad wife. And yes, it does go into details. So, of course, if you don't want to hear stuff like that, please don't watch the rest of this video because we're going to be reading her exact words in this. So this is a very long article. I tried to trim it down as much as possible just to read the important parts. We are going to be reading a lot still. She disappeared in 2019 to embrace marriage and motherhood in her husband's home country of Australia. 4 years later, though, Southern caused a new round of shockwaves, this time with a video recounting what happened next, the breakdown of her abusive marriage, her return to Canada as a single mother, and a stint living hand-to-mouth in a cabin in the woods. She tells me she's not alone. She tells me she knows many other women still suffering in unhappy trad life marriages. One of her WhatsApp groups, she says, is like the Underground Railroad for women in the conservative movement. Some of these are prominent media figures. There are a lot of influencers who are not in good relationships who are still portraying happy marriage publicly and bashing people for not being married while being in horrendous relationships. She hopes that in speaking out, she can reassure all of these women who are thinking in their heads, I'm uniquely terrible and I'm uniquely making a mistake, that no, something is more generally amiss. What then is amiss, in her view, it's not that conservatism as such is fundamentally mistaken or that complementary sex roles are unworkable, but the online trad life ideology has distilled a version of these roles that's both rigid and wildly oversimplified and thus woefully ill-equipped for real life in ways that pose significant risks for women in such marriages. I obviously have a lot of sympathy for, millions of conservative women around the world who are just like raised in this cult. And you're taught, like in the Mormon church, this is what your whole life is going to be about, being a trad wife, essentially, right? But at the same time, it's just so ironic that someone who made so much anti-feminist content that really paved the way for this stuff is now talking about, again, the word she's using here, considering all the racist garbage she's made throughout her life, the Underground Railroad for conservative female influencers. Again, all these people are still in terrible marriages, and they're still promoting this lifestyle. But anyway, let's go into this a bit further. So, how then did Southern get from posting videos about why I'm not a feminist to defending women's sex-specific interests within family life? This is not a million miles from what used to be called feminism. As Southern puts it, follow the listicle and you'll be fine. By the time she met her husband, she'd been condensing conservative values into listicle form as a media influencer for some years, to the point where it seemed possible to realise this framework in real life too. So when marriage beckoned at 22, she tells me, I thought I'd won the lottery. They were married within 4 months, arguably the equivalent for the right of my left-wing embrace of communes, anti-capitalist demos, and niche sexual subcultures. She was quickly pregnant. There were warning signs from early on. If I ever disagreed with him in any capacity, he'd just disappear for days at a time. I remember there were nights where he'd call me worthless and pathetic, then get in his car and leave. But she didn't see them thanks to the simplified anti-feminist ideology she'd absorbed and promoted. I had this delusional view of relationships that only women could be the one that make or break them and men can do no wrong. So she didn't spot the red flags even if they grew more extreme. He'd lock me out of the house. I remember having to knock on the neighbour's door on rainy nights because he'd get upset and drive off without unlocking the house. It was very strange to go from being this public figure on stage with people clapping to this girl crying, knocking on someone's door with no home to get into, and being abandoned with a baby. But as she tells it, the nightmare began in earnest when he was offered a work opportunity in Australia a few weeks after the birth of their baby. She did not want to leave her support networks behind, but he used the political and religious importance she placed on a lifelong marriage as a lever to force her to agree. Whenever I wouldn't do something, he would say, I'm going to divorce you. So feeling she had no other option, she assented. He also insisted she should publicly quit work. His work required a high level of government security clearance when she was a right-wing activist who had faced deplatforming, state investigations and being banned from the UK. In their early giddy romance, this had felt manageable, but when we moved back to Australia, he really wanted to get back into his old work and Southern became a liability. So the pressure was on. It was like, Lauren, you've got to hire lawyers, you've got to disavow everything, you've got to never talk publicly again. And in 2019, she announced that she was leaving media and activism altogether. I believed I had a certain role in my relationship, and it was to be the most submissive one that supports my husband's dreams. In a really, really warped way, this is what happens a lot with trad wife, relationships and stuff. Obviously, this has the irony of, making a woman who had an extremely toxic role and job actually stop doing that job. But in real life, in normal relationships, it's obviously another tool of control in that you're going to rely on the husband for all the income, all the finances, and you have no independence. And also as you get older, you have no work history. So if one day he decides to divorce you, while you might get some money, if you're a certain age, that's probably not going to last the rest of your life. So you're probably going to have to work again. And as we saw in my last video, that 40-something-year-old ex-trad wife was saying, I work 7 days a week now. I had nothing on my CV. I was basically like a ghost, essentially. It was like I was a 16-year-old trying to get a job when I was 44. Here's the most important part, right? This is the reality of being a trad wife. And this is also the reality that these conservative men want, and most conservative men want as well. And I've played this clip a million times to you, but because Lauren Southern has recently retweeted this guy, here is the Daily Wire crew, again, played it a million times because it's so telling, all bragging about how they don't do any household chores.
It's kind of a trick question because I hate them both equally, but I guess I would say I would rather do the dishes, but I'd prefer if she just did both of them.
Wrong answer.
Michael, to you.
Dishes, it's no question. I'm not sure in our entire marriage if I've ever done a full load of laundry, so I think I have that one.
I like it. All right, Drew?
Well, this is a trick question because I have not done anything around the house for 40 years. I've been a completely useless, but it's clear that if I had to choose, it would have to be dishes because she was just out of town for a month and I actually called her up and said, how do you do laundry? So I think dishes is the only thing I know how to do.
So they think that's funny and hilarious that none of them do anything, right? Of course, it has a more sinister undertone as well of why their wives are actually happy with this arrangement where they basically do nothing. So going on to the Lauren Southern part of this, thousands of miles away from friends and family, she reports becoming the closest thing to a modern-day Western slave With no income of her own, she had to do everything: the lawns, the house, the cooking, the baby care, his university homework as well. And I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any support. There was no help changing diapers. There was no help waking up in the night with a baby. I'd still have to get up to make breakfast before work. I'd be shaking and nervous for the fear I'm going to get yelled at. Then he'd berate her for spending all her time on tasks other than earning money. I was told daily that I was worthless, pathetic, dead weight. All you do is sit around and take care of the baby and do chores. When COVID shut down all real-world public life, her situation became hell on earth. Between the lockdown, claustrophobia, and her husband's behaviour, she began to revise her initial willingness to leave public life. She hoped it would win back his love. He was so much kinder and sweeter when I was the boss babe traveling the world working. That's a funny word for it. It seemed like becoming a mother made him lose respect for me. It was shocking to me again because the traditional view preached the opposite, that men love you more when you stop working and become a wife and mother. In her experience, though, this was very much not the case. So a year after retiring to embrace the trad wife lifestyle, she posted her comeback vid and began making sporadic media appearances. But even though she was no longer a deadweight financially, her job failed to appease her husband. He kept demanding I contribute more financially, but then would chew me out whenever I would work. It didn't seem to matter what she did. He would just give me impossible tasks all day that I simply could not finish. It felt like he would almost send me on errands with the intent of having me fail. She told me, as long as I put on the high heels and the lipstick when my husband comes home, as long as I cook the best meal, as long as I'm always submissive and say, yes, sir, whatever you want, things will go fantastic. And if it's not fantastic, the listicle version of traditionalism would just say she should make more effort. It was, she says, an embarrassing wake-up call, finding myself consistently applying these rules and instructions I found on Twitter and then never getting the results they were supposed to get in the realm of a real relationship. Talking about the men this ideology attracts, when I spoke to other women in the wider network of ex-trad women, they said the extremely online nature of this gender ideology attracts a higher than usual proportion of individuals with existing psychological issues, other than saying those guys want someone they can feel they can have definite control, who's never going to leave them, who they can do anything to. So she goes on to say, her husband eventually divorced her because she had like 2 family members die, went back to Canada with their children, and he said if she did this, he'd separate and not have any custody as well. So that's basically how it ended. And she talks about this time as well. My brain was breaking between 2 worlds because I couldn't let go of the ideology. I had been banned from countries over this ideology. I had destroyed my reputation internationally for this. How am I going to let go of this? Then she goes on to say, post-divorce, after becoming a single mother, my mental health started to improve. I started to repair all these really important friendships, and I'm living a much happier, much healthier life than I was before. Some of the most miserable people I've met, in fact, absolutely the most miserable people I've met, have been stuck in this weird LARPy trad dynamic. The happiest people she knows, on the other hand, are just living in reality. So that story right there is a story you would have heard a million times. I can even think of about 3 people in my extended family who have a very, very similar story to that. Meet a guy, give up all aspirations of any career, give up working, have children with them, and basically when they have children, they start becoming incredibly abusive, and then you feel like you can't leave, and often it takes decades and decades to leave, and when you leave, you basically like have to completely start over with nothing. And a lot of people, especially older people, are conditioned to accept that, and that's why men get away with all this terrible behavior for years and years. And something that always rubs me the wrong way about why men like are leaning more conservative, they blame the left for not offering like alternatives and stuff, not blaming the men who actually want this old world to keep existing so they can just have no responsibilities for acting absolutely terrible and treating women like shit, which I think is a bigger part of the problem than no left-wing alternatives to like, I don't know, Andrew Tate or stuff like that. And of course, when you read that story, it's hard not to feel bad for any woman in that situation. And the way that article is written frames it like she finally came to the light, right? She finally realized that conservatism was trash, but she didn't. She realized that this tradwife lifestyle online that she helped promote is actually trash. And she's helping other right-wing influencers that were in a support group But if you go on her Twitter, you wouldn't really think that, to be honest. You'd think she's completely the same, because she hasn't woken up to the fact that conservative ideology is completely toxic and dangerous for women, even if you pretend like you can be some sort of conservative feminist or something like that. You can't. And Lauren Southern's still existing in this conservative ecosystem and boosting all these conservative media figures and working in conservative media ensures that this type of ideology will keep existing, and she is still promoting it, whether or not she's actually writing on her Twitter, you should be a trad wife and be subservient to a man. She's still boosting the community that actually promote this stuff. And Matt Walsh is a good example of this, like a mainstream conservative YouTuber for the Daily Wire. She's retweeting him. He says the exact same shit about this as well. Exact same stuff. He is really no different to her ex-husband in this way, and he has a similar marriage set up where he has like a bunch of kids and talks about never doing chores and stuff like that while he works his cushy YouTube job, which probably doesn't involve much hard work at all, considering every YouTube channel at the Daily Wire has a massive crew on it. So that's where my sympathy ends from someone who had a massive crew on the far right, who continues to do this, and will have sympathetic articles written like this, where we're meant to think she's better than this ideology suddenly, when she's not. She's still promoting it, which means more women will suffer because people like her are still promoting this lifestyle. And although it might have been rebranded as something great like the trad wife lifestyle, it's basically the same stuff everyone of a certain generation would have had stories of friends or family going through, with mainly abusive husbands doing this stuff, where women had no autonomy, where women had no career prospects, and women were expected to basically be a servant, and there wasn't much you could do if your husband was very, very abusive. And that's why left-wing feminist activism was a good thing that shouldn't be demonized, because where would you be without it? Because these people still shit all over the left, like the leftists of the past, being responsible for so many of us having better rights among a variety of things. So when we think of like token conservatives, we largely think of people who are from like minority groups, who might be conservative talking heads because they've clearly been paid to, right? So like Candace Owens for like a black female conservative, Dave Rubin for a gay conservative, Blair White for a trans conservative, right? And we don't really think of women as like a token group in this. And of course we can't ignore white women's role in propping up American conservatism, American racism and stuff like that. I've actually spoke about this in a whole video in terms of white women's role in slavery. At the same time, this is still an ideology that victimizes women and ensures women will still be oppressed. So there really is no room for a conservative women who want some sort of liberation of women, because you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. You're trying to take this one issue off the liberals and off the left and take it for yourself because it personally affects you, trying to make it compatible. And there was even gay people in fascist Germany who pointed at the example of the ancient Spartans and Thebans to say that they could be compatible with fascism. And of course, this didn't work because they were just deluding themselves. The same way that Lauren Southern and other female conservative influencers are deluding themselves that conservative men will ever accept this, will ever accept this ideology, because their ultimate goal is the trad wife. They want that for every single woman now because they think it's the right way to run society. But anyway, that's it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.